I'm getting the green light. We've got all of our panelists in place, and I can see that we've got quite a few participants back a little early. So it's almost 1:30. So I think we might make a start. My name is Keith Besgrove. I'm one of the members of the NetThing steering committee, and it's great to be with you all today. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the break. We're going to jump right now into the next panel, the digital divide, which will discuss the important issue in today's current climate of digital inequality and exclusion, and the impact that this has had on vulnerable groups. And just by way of a little background with me, I was involved in federal government communications issues for quite a long time. This has been a long-standing and recurring issue that we're constantly trying to do something about. I'd like to now welcome Annette Mayne. She's the CEO of the Reconnect project, and she's going to introduce the panel and moderate the discussion. So, Annette, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. It's great to be here today, and thank you for the opportunity to include us as part of this important program, understanding what it is that the internet does for us now in Australia. My organisation is called the Reconnect project. We're Australia's first charity and social enterprise committed to closing Australia's digital divide through the provision of refurbished technology to people in need. We're a small not-for-profit established in 2019 and saw an incredible rise in the demand for our services during 2020 and 2021 with the COVID lockdowns. So a little bit of background first before we dig into our other panelists and the issues that we're looking to discuss, and a bit of background around what the digital divide actually is. The Australian Digital Inclusion Index classifies the digital divide or digital inclusion according to three components. And one is the access to digital environments, the ability to engage in digital environments, and whether it's affordable for someone to engage in digital environments. What the Reconnect project is mostly interested in is around the access and the affordability side of things through the provision of refurbished tech to people in need. But there's a pretty significant gap in Australia at the moment as to those who can engage in digital environments and those who cannot. And just to give you some stats and figures around that, 1 in 4 people currently identify as excluded or highly excluded from engaging in online activities. 1 in 7 households spend more than 10% of their weekly income for reliable internet access. And people who have attended university or tertiary education are twice as likely to be engaged in the digital environment than people who didn't finish high school. So there's this incredible gap between people who can access, afford, and have the ability to engage in the digital environment. And that's something that unfortunately isn't actually closing in Australia, it's actually growing. And one thing that the past 2 years with the COVID pandemic really highlighted was the impact that this has on vulnerable communities in Australia as to how they're able to maintain connectivity with family, friends, and essential services during a period of lockdown when they don't necessarily have the access or the ability or can afford to engage digitally. So that's a little bit about me, and I'll just hand over now to Bill from Counterpoint Community Services to introduce himself.
Thank you, Annette. My name is Bill. I'm the operations manager from Counterpoint Community Services. And we have 2 centers in the heart of Waterloo public housing estate. I think it's one of the biggest inner city public housing estate, at least in New South Wales. And we also have 1 preschool in Redfern, which is another big public housing estate in New South Wales. And most of our clients from disadvantaged communities, both financially and socially. A lot of them are actually from a CALD backgrounds, cultural and linguistic diverse. They're seniors and some First Nation community as well. And the other part of the vulnerable communities that we see is actually families with young kids. We've been here for over 40 years, and as part of our community center, we actually do capacity building activities, including English and computer classes. That's what Annette was saying about in terms of capacity build some of our communities to be able to use the technology. And then also as part of the accessibility and the affordability issues, we also have a computer with internet ready and printer and scanner for our communities who may not actually have a device or can afford to do so. So when it comes to the digital divide, that's quite apparent, but it's actually highlighted. I'll talk more about it in one of the programs that we have during COVID, because while a lot of people are working from home, we actually are resourcing the community, especially in terms of food resilience stuff, and also a lockdown plan with the government if the building that the community live in has to be locked in or locked down in that sense. And when we were doing the well-being check, we find that, you know, one of the issues during this period is social isolation, because of the social distancing issue. And then we actually bring light to a digital divide. I'll share a survey that we did, and then what we did with that survey later on that leads to a feasibility study and a proposal. That's from me for now.
Great, thanks for that, Bill. Let's hear from Kellie.
Thanks, Annette. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Happy Paws, Happy Hearts. We're an organisation that exists to overcome two really significant challenges. As we're all aware, I guess even before COVID, more than 1 million Australians were identifying as socially isolated or deeply socially excluded. And we also know that there's a challenge with hundreds of thousands of rescue animals in care centres and adoption facilities waiting for new homes. And what we do is a bit of a flip on animal assisted therapy. So instead of taking specially trained animals out to people in need, we bring people who are socially isolated into shelters and teach them how to care for rescue animals. We run programs for about 400 people each week, and we work with people with a range of abilities, mental health challenges, veterans and first responders and injured workers. And during COVID, we had to work out a way of taking our programs, which were on site and deeply based sort of in animal shelters, to an online environment, but also to keep people connected who were very vulnerable and had just started to come out of social isolation. So we've been building out the online component of our programs to help augment the on-site experience, to offer online-only programs that can help people and rescue animals and use the internet to make sure these deeply vulnerable people are staying connected. So yeah, that's where we come in, and very excited to start building, I guess, on that basic connection opportunity afforded by our online programs and make them into programs that can harness people's abilities and learnings about rescue animal care and build digital literacy as well. We know firsthand how connection can be really enhanced through the digital environment, and that's something that if people are ill, if they don't have access to a support worker or they're isolated due to COVID lockdowns, they can still stay connected and stay involved in our programs.
Great, thanks for that, Kellie. People might be wondering, it's interesting to have someone on the panel today talking about the interaction between caring for animals in shelters and the digital divide, but rest assured, we will certainly have some examples as to how this is impacting on Kellie's organisation. Amber, over to you.
Thanks, Annette and everybody. So my name is Amber Marshall, and I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at the Queensland University of Technology. And I work in a research centre called the Digital Media Research Centre. And we have a program of work that is dedicated to researching digital inclusion and participation across all types of contexts and in all types of communities. So one of our big projects we have going on at the moment is a federally funded ARC linkage, if that means anything to anybody. Essentially, it's a partnership between us and 2 other universities, or maybe it's 3, I can't remember. But the important part of this is that we partner with community organisations who are doing digital inclusion work in the community. And we really try to get to the bottom of what are some of these underlying factors that are impacting low-income families in particular in terms of digital inclusion. And as has been alluded to by the panel already, those intersections of social and digital inclusion are really apparent. And we investigate these things across those 3 levels of the Digital Inclusion Index: access, affordability, and digital ability. And we're doing that work in 3 sites in Queensland: a rural site, a regional site, and an inner city site. We have Western Sydney, we have a case outside of Melbourne, and one in Tasmania. And with the help of the Outer Foundation, we were also able to add a 7th site, and that's Mornington Island, which is a remote Aboriginal community in the Gulf of Carpentaria. So looking forward to exploring, all of the issues that are coming out from all of these diverse communities. And I think, we'll see that, there are definitely some things that are shared across these communities and the types of cohorts that we've all been thinking about and talking about already. But we'll also find that there are also quite unique challenges that really need to be addressed depending on who's experiencing, that exclusion. Thanks, Annette.
Great, thanks, Amber. So if we can start off, I guess, first by having a bit of a chat around why it's important that some of us are tackling the digital divide in Australia. And from the Reconnect project's perspective, our focus is on the physical component of accessing online communities and digital environments, and that is whether people actually have access to appropriate technology, the actual hardware that's required for someone to undertake their studies online, have a telehealth appointment, interact with Centrelink, or do their banking. And then again, during the pandemic, being able to maintain some form of social connection with family and friends and community groups when everything was switching around to being digitally delivered programs. So for us, what we identified is that whilst we may have the NBN and there may be the access to the NBN as it's rolled out across Australia, there's one thing that's still really stopping people from being able to effectively engage online is actually having the access to the hardware that's required and having hardware that's of a suitable quality to be able to engage in things like telehealth appointments or Zoom classroom lessons. The COVID pandemic really brought this around, particularly in regards to delivery of education. We had, I had even public schools in Western Sydney reaching out to us for support, seeking to get iPads so that kids themselves could actually continue with their schooling online during the lockdown period. And we also had hospitals in Western Sydney calling out and asking if we could provide mobile phones for clients who were isolating because someone else in their family had COVID and then they were the primary income earner, so they needed to still be able to get to work, but health authorities needed to be able to contact the person who was at home with COVID. There was only one mobile phone for the household. So right even down at a very basic level where we were having government departments seeking our support to get technology out to people, just so that they actually had the physical technology to be able to engage digitally. So I know that Bill's going to talk a little bit more about the impact of not being able to actually get internet access as well. And I'm sure Amber's got some insights on that too. But from the Reconnect project's perspective, what we're seeing is this growing area of concern where if people aren't able to maintain education, for example, online, then it's children, several years down the track, we're going to get falling behind in literacy and mathematics programs. unfortunately, what has, or fortunately, maybe in some cases, what has happened is a lot of service delivery now after the pandemic is actually still being delivered online. A number of TAFE programs are still being delivered online. There are a number of areas where face-to-face engagement through community programs, social service supports and education haven't actually gone back face-to-face. They found that this model of working online, maybe it's cost effective, they don't have to have the space for a business premises to operate so much. But what that's meaning is that there are still people that can't engage because they don't have access to technology. So Kellie, can you give us a bit of an insight as to how you're finding that, this process of having to tackle the digital divide, what that's meaning for your organisation?
Yeah, absolutely. As you said, this digital divide unfairly impacts vulnerable people, and our audience for all of our programs are vulnerable, and we're working with people to draw them out of social isolation. So we connect them with like-minded people and we give them the opportunity to give back to rescue animals, which is a beautiful program on site, and you can see how that interaction might work. And COVID really exacerbated that. When people are coming out of social isolation and they've got a reason to come out, which is our programs and the opportunity, I guess, for people to give back, but to have that taken away, if they aren't ready to connect digitally, it's really hard to continue that process of helping them to return to life. So we really looked at, well, where do we start? How do we make information available to our participants in a way that they can understand it, that it gives them that connection and interaction? So we started really offering programs during COVID through an online app and filming accessible content so that people could process it and enjoy it at the same time, and then actually having live stream sessions because they could touch base with the beautiful groups of friends that they'd made on site at our various shelter locations. So it really started out as like, what is our reason for being? Our reason for being is providing social connection and opportunities for vulnerable people to give back, right? So we tried to use the internet as a channel in which to do that when we couldn't always be on site. I guess what we found was there's so many benefits of our participants having that online access as well. And the more we can build that digital literacy and give them the opportunity to access, suitable and exciting content, but also see and talk to people that they're connecting with and continue to break out of that isolation, it actually augments our on-site programs on a weekly basis. So people can connect more than once. If they're away due to illness, if they can't get a support worker to bring them out to a shelter for the day, they can still be a part of programming, they can still learn. Also for people who sometimes have additional processing needs and they want to take information in at the time that they want to take it in, when they can get some help to understand it, they can access that information on online content again and again, which is really exciting. And what we've found, I guess, as well, is we look to transition the participants in our program to volunteering, further study or work in the animal care industry and beyond. And even in the animal care in the animal care space, digital literacy is absolutely essential for people. The ability to jump online and have a chat, as you would have seen during COVID, but even going forward, a lot of animal shelters and adoption centres are doing online adoptions and meetings. So whatever space you're working in, that digital literacy is absolutely crucial. And the opportunity to learn and connect in that space is a really beautiful thing. And a lot of our participants, even when they graduate from Happy Paws, they now have the ability, we call a lot of them for a while, they would lurk and not turn their cameras on when we had our live streams, and they wouldn't come, but we'd get a dog and we'd start talking about what we were doing in shelter. And then suddenly 2 months in, they'd turn their camera on and they became part of that group. And there's been friendships developed and lots of activities that have come out of that. And a lot of people are meeting up separately outside of Happy Paws, which is exactly what we're aiming for. So I guess now we're really investing in the online components of our program because we see they're absolutely essential for people who perhaps can't get into a shelter, but can still learn a lot and connect with like-minded people, but also because they augment our existing learnings and programs so much in a different way. So I think if you're looking at drawing people out of social isolations, the channels in which we connect with them are so important, and it's not always one size fits all. And the way people are connecting might change depending on their own personal circumstances. So I think, you know, building people up to be ready to connect in a variety of ways is what we're really excited about. And we know that, you know, we can continue to do our job, which is helping people return to life and helping shelter animals at the same time.
So in some ways, Kellie, everything needing to switch to digital delivery for that period of time during COVID was a way of potentially reaching new audiences actually for you.
Oh, for sure, absolutely. We have, you know, we're operating at 6 locations around Australia at the moment, in Queensland and New South Wales, and we're about to launch in Darwin, which is very exciting. But we've got a lot of interest. Lots of people around the country want to connect with us and be a part of the programs, but we didn't have the content or the environment that they could do that. And to be honest, a lot of the time as well, when you're working with people who are vulnerable and need extra support needs, if the content is not presented in a way that's accessible and engaging, and easy to access, and you don't have people to help them walk through that process, then it's not going to be able to attract them anyway. So for us, it's actually built out a whole new opportunity for people to connect with us. And one of the lovely things is when we are moving to a new location, participants often join us online for some courses first. They start to touch base with the trainers. They start to learn a bit more about animal care. And for someone who's socially isolated and a little bit anxious about going into a shelter environment or making new friends, they kind of can do that really incrementally, which is lovely.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kellie. Amber, what can you tell us about the research that you and your team have been doing and in regards to why tackling this digital divide is so important at the moment?
Thanks, Annette. I guess I want to kind of pick up where you and Kellie kind of left off, that, you know, tackling the digital divide isn't just a cost, it's actually an investment. And when we do include new cohorts of people in civic participation, it's not just those individuals who benefit, it's actually all of us. And I think one of the fantastic examples of this is some of the work we've been doing with the Queenslanders with Disability Network. And they've rolled out a really comprehensive digital inclusion program with other partners who and have actually addressed access, affordability and digital literacy as part of a big program of work. So like you, Annette, they have partnered with Give It, who have provided devices to people, and they've partnered with Better Life Mobile to try to design and deliver affordable data and I guess less expensive plans. And then they've also delivered digital ability workshops into the community. So it's an enormous undertaking. And I was fortunate to attend a workshop convened by Queensland Government yesterday with some of my QDN colleagues, which was focused on disability and digital inclusion. And this theme really emerged around, you know, if people living with a disability or vulnerable cohorts generally, if they miss out, then actually we all miss out. And one of the, I guess, pointed examples of this is when, you know, if we can employ diverse workforces, we actually get better outcomes and better productivity in those workforces. And I guess similar to what Kellie was just saying, you know, we can actually fill demand for employment a whole lot better if we have a bigger pool of people to recruit from. And digital access and the ability to sustainably afford those connections, and also having the right device, to what you said earlier, Annette, it's very difficult to apply for a job on a smartphone. And what we see with cohorts of people living with a disability or living on a low income is that they almost always rely, or very much so rely on a smart device. And often that's shared between more than one family member. So being able to do your job applications or job searches or education or all of the things that you need to do to be job ready are very, very difficult for these cohorts. And I just come back to this idea that when we talk about the digital divide, we should take a strengths-based approach. And I guess I borrow that term from the workshop yesterday, but it's an investment in our community and our economy. It's not just a cost where we have to keep throwing money at this supposed problem. I think I'll leave it at that.
No, that's great. That's fabulous insights, and you're absolutely spot on. It's not a cost; it is an investment, and it's bringing everyone to the same, I guess, leveling the playing field. Because, I always say this to people: imagine trying to apply for a job. Imagine trying to contact Centrelink. Imagine trying to just, even figure out a Google map or whatever. Some of these things without the appropriate technology just makes it nigh on impossible for someone to engage, and that really puts people at a major disadvantage. And as you say, that there's a workforce potential out there. There's people all across Australia that we could be tapping into for specialist skills and areas, but that is going to be reliant on them being able to access, afford, and have the ability to engage digitally. And this is a big thing that we're needing to handle. So, Bill, what's it like for you working with some quite low socioeconomic communities in Sydney then, and the impact and the importance of the tackling the digital divide in those areas for you?
Thanks, Annette. Similar to what Amber has found in her research and what Kellie have been saying, literacy, digital literacy is basically the one of the most important thing, as well, as we know, because a lot of the community government services has gone digital, gone through the digitalization, as what you have alerted to. But more basic than that, as you know, because we talked to before the panel talked together, the other two A's, the accessibility to a device that a lot of people think about, still think about it as a luxury, is no longer the case. It's actually a necessity item that we talked about before, as well as the affordability of getting a data. And that is exactly what we found with this program during COVID that I'm going to touch a little bit on. So before that, just want to echo what everyone has said. There's other data out there as well. For example, 2016 census found only 35% of public housing households have access to a Wi-Fi connection, and that remains to be the most reliable data that we have. And the other part of that is that even though there's 35% of public housing households have it, the internet usage through mobile phone is dependent again on the person's socio-economic status, and low middle class people are really relying on low cost mobile phone and SIMs as well. So that makes their data in terms of the affordability is such a challenge for them. So on the other hand, in May 2019, the New South Wales Council of Social Services partnered with UTS, surveyed 730 people from the low to middle income household, and found that 14% reported difficulty in paying for their phone bill on time, 16% reported having a mobile phone but without appropriate amount of data usage, and 29% said that they need to limit their own mobile phone usage due to financial reasons. Those are big numbers. And similar to what we found during COVID, we find that the digital access and social connections when we're doing the survey actually very similar. I'll give you some numbers here. In terms of digital access, only 18% of people that we survey actually have unlimited data, whereas 57% is limited, 10% say that they have insufficient, and very sad 14% say they actually have no access to data. And that corresponds with 24% of people saying that they have daily connection, social connection, 65 self-reported as adequate. And there's a lot to unpack there as well, even though it's a self-report adequacy. and 10% actually need assistance, and that's where a service like us come in. And through that, that's why I say we are quite very lucky. When we get that kind of data, we found that we need to do something. So the idea is to really we actually ask around our network, and then we get a deep technology incubator helping us come on board and actually do a feasibility study to bring a digital hub or a watering hole in that sense into the area during this time. We actually have it more than 10 months to have that feasibility study for and sort out area and all the stuff. And the deep tech incubator actually bring in a proposal with us, and it's very focused on the needs of the community there, and actually brings in tens of thousands of software and hardware and even technical support as part of that proposal. But still, we're still using that we're still negotiating with the government how that can work. And there's still that red tapes there, even though there is that feasibility study, as well as what we think is a good proposal where it costs government nothing. But we'll talk on other more on that in the next few things. I think we'll discuss about that as well.
Thanks, Bill. I mean, there's some pretty stark statistics or figures from the research that you've done with the community just in the Waterloo and Redfern areas here in Sydney. And that's pretty frightening, the amount of people that can't actually afford to keep their mobile phone plans operating, which then leads into a whole, which does also then lead us into what we can talk about now, is that what is the actual impact that this has on the communities that we're working with. Certainly for the Reconnect project, the impact that we see, and we're I guess an intermediary as an organisation. So we refurbish devices and then work with caseworkers at social service organisations like Bill at Counterpoint Community Services, but also with women's shelters, at-risk youth outreach programs, refugee support groups. We work with the caseworkers in those organisations to get the right tech for their clients. So the caseworkers come to us and say, well, we really need this kind of a tablet. It needs to be able to run this level of software or apps on it. And we look at what people have donated to us, refurbish it and get it out to that caseworker. So for us, the impact of the digital divide we're seeing is actually an exponential growth in the number of caseworkers that are reaching out to us for support. When the Reconnect project began, we had this idea that it would be great if we could provide one device per day, and 365 devices in a year sounded like a really achievable goal. We're already pretty much at triple that number, and we haven't even been operating for 3 years fully. So it's growing rapidly as more and more organisations find out about us and our service. The demand for our program is just, as I said, growing at an exponential rate. And the result of that is that the impact on us as a small not-for-profit is being able to keep up with that demand, being able to find more organisations that are prepared to donate their technology to us when they no longer require it, and being able to keep up with the pace of the repairs and the refurbishment process. So for us, the impact of addressing the digital divide is actually still growing very much so as an organisation, and we're doing what we can to support those caseworkers to get devices out to their clients. But there is still quite this gap that we're trying to fill. So Amber, in the communities that you've been working in the research, what do you see on the ground as the actual impact of the digital divide on a day-to-day level in those communities?
Thanks, Annette. I guess for this question, I wanted to get a little bit more specific and look at our work on Mornington Island. And I really do need to acknowledge my colleagues, Dr. Jessa Rogers, who's leading the work, Dr. Kim Osman and Professor Harriet Babakan. So just to paint you a picture, if you've not been to Mornington Island, and it is quite remote and it takes a whole day to get there and a whole day to get back. It's an island in the Gulf of Carpentaria with a small population. I think it's about 1,000 and 85% identify as First Nations people. And it's very remote physically, because there are small flights that Rex runs from Cairns and Mount Isa that come in a few times a day. Otherwise it's by boat. And they do have a barge that comes once a week to deliver things like food and essential items. So in terms of what's available to people on the island, they do have health service, they have a school. One of the critical pieces of infrastructure is the shop, the grocery store. But as you may know, when you go to very remote areas, the prices of those products in there are extraordinarily high. And so, we do have a population who tends to be on a low income and living in very kind of expensive circumstances where, flights to get on and off are expensive, food's expensive, etc. So when we talk about digital infrastructure and, there is mobile coverage in the town centre, and it's stretched. There is an upgrade coming apparently under the regional connectivity program, but nearly everyone we spoke to, and in fact all of the families we spoke to, are on mobile only. The NBN connections available are a satellite connection, and for reasons that I'll take you through shortly, the satellite connections on homes don't appear to be viable options for our families. So there's this major reliance on mobile, sharing of devices, sharing of data, which does feed into some of the Indigenous sharing economy culture, but also speaks to, I guess, the deficiency of devices and data. There's a data and device, divide in and of itself. So in terms of the satellite connection, because the argument can be made, well, you've got NBN access, let's just get you connected. But of course, there's all of these contextual issues that aren't always in the conversation about that. And one of them is that when we see people living on a low income, no matter what their cultural background is, we see people living day to day. And in that case, prepaid is actually more sustainable for them. It might be more expensive in the longer term, but they won't have a bill coming out of their account every month. And some of the families we've spoken to are really quite terrified of getting into a contract and becoming in debt if they actually miss their payments. And even if it's a no lock-in contract, cancel anytime, there's still this aversion to getting into a contract where, perhaps you've shared your password with other people in your family and they use all of your data and you're not even aware that you've exceeded the terms of your contract. So prepaid is best in this instance, and prepaid means mobile. And I guess some of the impacts around, low levels of accesses to devices, low levels of access to data, and particularly devices like laptops, we didn't see many of them in the community, is that it actually compounds the physical and social isolation of living on an island. So, you can actually get Woolworths to deliver a package on the barge of non-perishable goods and save a whole lot of money on toilet paper and tinned food and things like that. But if you don't have the right access and the device and you don't have the skills to do online shopping, then that's not an option, and you end up paying exorbitant prices in the local store just to eat. Education is another big one. So there is a school there. It's a primary school. It will take kids up to year 10, but most kids in high school need to go to boarding school. And if they can't contact their parents and their family members because of this low levels of digital inclusion on the island, it compounds their isolation from their families. And other things like in-home health care and other things are very difficult to do. Accessing essential services like Services Australia services or whatever is also quite difficult. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that there's these intersecting compounding factors that from the outside seem to be able to be solved by, for example, getting an NBN satellite connection, but that solution in and of itself doesn't really address all of the complexities or really acknowledge, or I guess it's a lack of listening to the end user about what they need, and rather providing a solution that doesn't fit the local context. So I guess I'll just leave it at that. Thanks, Annette.
That's pretty, it's pretty stark when, you know, you're saying, well, actually, you know, essentially the cost of living is so high for people in this community that being able to choose whether you have, you know, access to your mobile phone, whether you have a prepaid program so you can contact your child who's at boarding school, or whether you're choosing to eat, you know, in essence, that's pretty, it's pretty extensive, you know, the level at which that's going to impact the community, not just now, but also into the future.
I might just add, Annette, that we also see low-income families on the mainland making similar sorts of decisions about investment in technology over other essential, you know, products or services that they need.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, again, that's one of the reasons why the Reconnect project has come about, to try and help at least with that hardware side of things. Bill, you've mentioned a little bit already about the impact that the digital divide has in the community you're working in, but can you go into a little bit more detail and maybe talk a little bit? I know you were doing some work with City of Sydney just to try and even get some form of infrastructure in place.
Yeah, it's very similar experience as what Amber have said before. You know, I'm looking at the time as well. I'll give you two cases if you like, a very short one. One real issue is like what Amber talked about is really for families with more than one child going to school with just one smart devices, especially during COVID, where they actually have to go take turns to go to school, basically. Also, that create a lot of motivation issues in terms of level of what to, how to motivate them to study, and all that is very hard. And it quickly create a very stressful environment in their household as well, and also creates stress and leads to mental health issues for the family dynamics. You know, that's a very clear impact that digital divide has, for example. And then we are really looking at saying that the hierarchy of needs, you know, coming back to the fundamentals framework, hierarchy of needs. And I would put Wi-Fi and smart devices at the moment as a very basic fundamental needs that people need to have. And the other issue, the other case that I can talk about really is like, for example, account communities, someone older that don't have digital literacy, they actually have two issues. One is actually language issue, because most of the services is actually in English, and then compounded that with actually a digital literacy issue that actually create a lot more stress as well. And then if they don't do that, then they'll get their benefits cut. So that have actually very detrimental impact into their real life, and that is something that a lot of the, you know, general population might not actually understand, all this real impact to a person's life. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily about being able to you know, cruise YouTube videos. It's actually being able to engage with essential services. And if you haven't got the technology and you haven't got the ability to be able to do that, you don't have that digital literacy level, then it's again, it's compounding the impact for those people in those situations. Thanks, Bill. Kellie, what about you? What's the impact in your community? I mean, obviously during the pandemic, it made your service, I guess, have to pivot, that fabulous COVID word. Yeah. So what's the ongoing impact, do you think, with the digital divide in with what you're doing?
Yeah, look, I think it needs to be factored in, and the crucial opportunity and essential nature of digital channels has to be factored into our program delivery now. So every program we run now has an online component, and when we're looking at resourcing, when we're looking at building out a program, we look at how do we deliver it on site and online, how do we augment the on site, but also is there a way we can offer these learnings and opportunities in an online environment as well. So I think for a lot of charities that are trying to connect with people, it just becomes something that isn't an, oh, well, one day we'll add on an online component because that would be really lovely and we can share it with more people. It's actually an essential part of program development for Happy Paws, Happy Hearts. And we've been really fortunate, just to give you a quick example of our employment pathways program, Explore. We piloted that as a little program. We had participants coming through Happy Paws for a number of years and developing great confidence skills in the animal shelters and wanting to move on to, you know, employment and independent volunteering in the animal sheltering industry and all over the place. So but we created an Explore Employment Pathways program specifically for these people on site. And we have now, thanks to AUDA, got some funding to actually do an online component of that program, because we realize we've got such great interviews, such great guest speakers, such great content, but also lots of people all over the country who were interested in accessing it that couldn't, because it was this tiny pool on site. So that's why we're moving to that environment. But as well as that, building in the digital literacy is absolutely crucial. So like exactly like Amber was saying, one of the things that is absolutely standard if you're volunteering at an animal shelter or working in any space at the moment is you have your COVID safe certificate, right? So you can say, I've been online and here's my COVID safe certificate. So I've got the basics down. We spend a session working with people one-on-one. We bring in the iPads, exactly like Bill was saying, we have to provide that technology. Or we walk them through it online when they've got access so they can actually do that COVID safe certificate. So they've got something to put on their CV, but they're also ticking that box for volunteering. So it's not a big step up. And it's really that investment in what does that digital divide mean for this person on their individual journey to return to life. You know, it might be that COVID safe certificate ticks a really great box. It might be, you know, having someone spend time with them with an actual, you know, laptop so they can think about what their CV or resume might look like. That's really important to them as well. It might be just learning to do this, right? Interact in a group chat and be feeling confident to turn your video camera on and have a conversation. So I think the difference for us is that we've realized it not only opens up an audience, but is absolutely essential for any community-based program to build in that digital divide and to think about everything from the internet access. So we've really worked hard now to build out Wi-Fi that's quality and accessible to our participants at all our sites, you know, and that kind of thing just has to be built into your program logic and your theory of change. So it's something that's not an afterthought or an addition, it's actually essential. And I think we've all identified here today, you know, living in the environment we live in Australia at the moment, if you're not able to access the online environment and navigate it, you're going to be really, really left behind. And that's our fear. And so we realize that's a crucial part of what we do.
Yeah, that's great. And it's, I guess, the impact for your organization too is that you've had to develop this infrastructure and bring all this technology into play, which obviously comes at a cost to your organization. And it's great that you've got some grant funding to be able to do that. So that kind of brings me across to, well, what is actually happening out there to try and help overcome these challenges? What kind of things are you doing within your organizations, or what can you see still needs to be done as well? So how are we going to help close this digital divide? What are the intersection points that we need to bring together to be able to make this happen in high density city living, in remote communities, in working with people who don't have the digital literacy? So from my own knowledge, there's been quite a significant investment, financial investment through government funding into digital literacy programs, particularly working with seniors over the last couple of years. That's great, but again, if that person doesn't actually have access to the hardware and the technology side of things, how are they going to use that? And then as new technology and advances come out, I mean, 2 years ago, how many people were using Zoom? Now it's become a mainstay for so many of us. But if you're someone who maybe is an older demographic and you you can't understand when these new updates come out, or how do we keep making sure that people aren't just getting their foot in to being digitally included, but are also coming along the path as things shift and change. So Bill, I am interested to hear a little bit more about this digital watering hole, as you called it. What's the thought and methodology behind that?
Well, that concept comes from the proposal from the Deep Tech Incubator. And the idea is, well, we might call it a digital hub. So making it into a learning center with all the three things in there: the accessibility to a device, the affordability that people don't have to pay because it's already embedded in it, as well as then people, volunteers from the technical support side, and it become a learning hub, a digital learning hub for people who actually needs it. So if we take a community center as a example, and you just put a digital framework into it and make it into a learning hub that actually fits in, if someone needs to come in and say, help me with Centrelink, or how do I get my housing application, maintenance application, to a child or coming in and say, I need a quiet place to study, and this is where I can, just because you have all the equipment ready for us to use. So then it becomes like a African animal watering hole where all the animals come in and get the digital needs that they need. So that was the whole idea of a digital watering hole.
And what else do you think can be done, particularly for people in the social housing?
Actually, someone in the chat, I've been chatting as well with people, is a good idea. That initiative like yours, I cannot recommend your initiative enough, Annette, because I think that actually fulfill one of the most fundamental needs that people have. And on the other side, as the person say, it actually also will help with the e-waste that we actually have. And those are very much a win-win-win solution, a triple win, a quadruple win solution. And for that to be able to refurbish and then give it to someone who is in need, and what it does as well is, because it's through a community centers or council, that actually also have that connection with the community, and that is what is much needed. So it's not just a piece of equipment, but it's actually a piece of connection for people to do. And I'll stop there as well.
So Amber, would that kind of a setup work in some of the communities that you're working in? So having a kind of a hub, or this like the watering hole concept?
Yes, and I totally endorse, and I think our research evidences that these community place-based approaches are best, because they actually meet the needs of the community, and they are delivered by people in the community who can pass on the knowledge and expertise and skills to others within the community. I think one of the worst things you can do is fund a program where you fly in people who do a workshop and then fly them back out again. Unfortunately, in some of our most remote areas, there just aren't the people to deliver these things, so that we just don't have the same level of social infrastructure, like libraries and community organisations and community halls and post offices and all of those things that provide this, I guess, that facilitate the delivery of devices, or facilitate digital literacy workshops, or even drop-in sessions to bring your phone and things like that. So I think one of the things we can invest more in is this digital capability building at the community level. Because the further out of the cities you go, with my kind of urban rural digital divide lens on, the less included you are, and digital skills is actually the worst of the three in terms of the index. If you're a rural person, you're much more likely to have fewer digital skills, and therefore it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if no one in the community has the skills, there's no sort of kindling to have transfer of skills within the community, and you end up having to bring outsiders in. So I think we need to get really creative about partnerships between levels of government, for example. So, you know, the regional or remote councils partnering with state-based programs or organisations. Telcos, I think, really need to start investing in these areas, and I think it's part of their corporate social responsibility to do so. And really at all levels and in all sectors, you know, truly start treating digital access as an essential service and a human right. It's been declared by the UN as a human right, and yet in our first world country or in our developed nation, we have so many people who are not meeting those standards. And, you know, it's one thing to kind of bang on about all of this, but it really is, I guess, providing those solutions. And I think there is that gap in the community capability, because we do see that even where, for example, the library is eligible to apply to be connected, or to the state library to run Tech Savvy Seniors or the Be Connected program, they may not have the skills or the access themselves to be able to deliver them. So I think that's an important gap to address in investment wise, but also research and programs.
And I that point about the libraries, I really picked up on that earlier when you were speaking, that, you know, community centres, libraries, post offices, so many places have closed, and so much has gone digital, and it is the way that all, you know, the government wants all their services to be digitally accessible. It does make it incredibly hard. And yes, whilst libraries might be, you know, an obvious location choice for something like a hub scenario, if you don't actually have the people in there with the skills to be able to do that, then it's still not going to work. And so that investment into the people and the infrastructure, and to be able not just to go in and set it up, but to be able to maintain it and to keep it moving with the times, it's really important. Kellie, what's on your wish list? What do you think would help, you know, closing the digital divide with the communities and the people that you're working with?
I think it's just this mosaic approach, right? Like we have seen, you know, you said before, Annette, it's a little bit hard to understand why Happy Paws, Happy Hearts, that works in shelters with rescue animals, is so passionate about the digital divide. But when we're working with the people that we're working with, we can see firsthand, you know, what's happening. So for me, on my wish list is, I think, this, you know, growing awareness that we're all seeing the same challenges from a variety of different perspectives, and there's a lot of iterative things that can be done to position people for success in that space and to close the divide. So I think better awareness and then advocacy. So we're partnering up and advocating as a block and saying this kind of thing is happening right through from access to devices through to the requirement to fill out digital forms to participate in a lot of what we would consider everyday activities. So yeah, for me, on my wish list is, you know, awareness across the board from corporates, from governments, and from all these community services. It's something we need to work on together. We need to factor in to our planning and our strategies. And we need to draw on the expertise, which is why I'm so excited. I'm so frantically listening to what everyone's saying and looking at the opportunities to draw on the expertise, not for our own organisations, but really to help the people that we work with. So yeah, for my wish list, it's that, you know, we combine that mosaic of really good ideas and opportunity together, and we move it forward in a way where we can advocate for changes that are needed. And I agree. I came from the library space. I worked in the library space for a while in community engagement, and I'm really passionate. But, you know, that's an amazing space to invest in. But you've got to have the people on the ground that are willing and able and empowered to deliver those exciting programs. But I do love Bill's idea of this investing in that digital water hole that we can all kind of take advantage of.
Fantastic. Thank you. I mean, we've had a great conversation and touched on a number of different areas and looked at the complexities around the digital divide, that there isn't one size fits all solution to be able to help close the digital divide in Australia, but there really does need to be more investment in the infrastructure side of things. and the accessibility side of things, to be able to make sure that those people who have been given the ability to engage actually have the required equipment and opportunity to do so. So thank you everyone for taking part. Thank you to my fellow panelists and to everyone that was commenting on the chat. And hopefully we continue with some more pressure. We'll get continued funding and support to help us in our mission to close the digital divide in Australia. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Annette, and thank you to the panel. That's been a fantastic session, and I've learnt a lot, and I've been reminded of things that I had hoped were getting better, but still seem to be with us. So that's been a really great session, and indeed a great chat session as well. We're now going to break for after